I'm Jason Moyer. I'm with the Town of Cary Inspections Department. I'm here to do a typical framing inspection to communicate expectations and bring transparency to the process. I would never be able to provide an all-inclusive checklist for inspection approval because in regards to the North Carolina Residential Code, there's over 300 pages to enforce. This is obviously not an all-inclusive inspection, but rather a general overview on what we look for. I hope that this brings insight and provides valuable information and thus a successful inspection. Brandon, thanks for meeting me today for your framing inspection.
Good morning, Jason.
So we're going to go ahead and go in your permit box and make sure you have all your documentation needed for this inspection. Let's talk about the permit box for a second. First, obviously it needs to be in the proximity of the dwelling that you're going to get inspected today. It needs to have the pertinent information so I know where I'm going. I need the address, permit number, and lot number. So we're going to go ahead and open this up, make sure everything's in there to get started.
Okay, great.
So in the town, we require that all the permit cards be printed on green stock paper. On this permit card, I'm just making sure where I stand on all my preceding building inspections and all my rough-in inspections. All the documentation we like to have in a weatherproof container in case the permit box blows over, it rains. So where we stand on the inspections, everything's signed off. My documentation that has been provided to me from Brandon is my town approved plans. I've got my I-joist layout, I've got my truss layout, I've got all the data sheets, I've got all the pertinent information that I'm going to need to perform this inspection. So here we are on the second floor right now, getting ready to start on our roof framing inspection. And essentially there are two separate types of roofs. One is a stick-built roof, which we'll talk about in a moment. And in this area, with the fast-paced environment and structural integrity, we deal a lot with engineered roof systems. So in order for me to do that inspection, I need the engineered layout as well as the data sheets that correspond. This particular unit has 37 different trusses, and each one of those data sheets determines how I will proceed with the inspection. These data sheets are critical in doing that inspection because they note the required lateral bracing, hardware, and bearing enhancement. While we're in this room, I'm also looking at the insulation baffles, which are required to be 1 inch off the roof sheeting. Those baffles are critical in ventilation of the attic. You don't want hot, humid, stagnant air stuck in the attic. You want that ventilation going through there. Also, while we're doing a framing inspection, it's an opportune moment for the inspector to be a little proactive in regards to building final issues that might arise. In this condition right here situation, we're in a sleeping room, so I'm also looking at my escape openings for height, size, window limiting operation if required. As noted before, these data sheets are critical in us doing our framing inspection. This girder truss in particular specifically notes a nailing and a bolting pattern. For the structural integrity of that truss, that's already been designed that way, so I'm here to verify that that's been done, Brandon. This truss in particular notes that through bolts are supposed to be every 4 foot on center, and your bottom cord nails are supposed to be at 2 rows at 4 inches on center. In addition to this, you've got substantial uplift on each end that we're verifying by both the data sheet and the layout. This truss in particular, and that's when we get into the wall framing aspect of the inspection now, is we've come from the engineered roof framing down to the wall framing, and at that point we have to go with the engineered seal plans. So Brandon, these data sheets are critical in how we're going to proceed with this girder truss verification right here. Obviously with this girder truss bearing right here, we're dealing with a condition where your engineer specifically notes it's supposed to be an 8 2x4 stud column, and it's supposed to be end grain bearing, which means the studs go directly up to the bottom of that girder truss. So now in this area, we're also looking at fire stopping at the top and the bottom of the plate, all your trade rough ends. In regards to future inspections like your building final, now's an opportune time for me to take a look at your escape openings, which are required in this bedroom, the sleeping room. Minimum glazed area we got to worry about. If the window is less than 24 inches from the floor, that window can't open more than 4 inches. So this is an opportune time for us to look at that aspect as well. Also in this sleeping room, we're looking for smoke notification. So we're looking up there and just seeing make sure you got a box at this point.
So Jason, I have this broken window that's on order. Explain to me how this will affect me in going into insulation.
That's a good question, Brandon. Code requires that when I'm doing my framing inspection, you only need temporary drying means such as roofing underlayment and roof boots. But understand that if you do go to insulation, you're required to have permanent drying means such as all your windows, flashings, and your permanent roof coverings. Brandon, we're down here on the first floor now. So just as we were upstairs with the roof trusses, we're dealing with engineered lumber down on the first floor in regards to engineered I-joists. We have the I-joist layout, and that's going to determine our manufacturer that we're using, our spacing, our model number, the hardware, and any other thing that might be required for installation of that product. So in this situation right here, we have hangers. We're checking the nails. We've got engineered beams up here. And actually your situation is unique in the sense that typically beams are fully bearing. But I did notice in your engineered plans, it did allow for that beam to offset and hang off of that wall. So we are compliant with that and everything looks good there. Something in passing in this area is the code required air barrier in insulated walls. That helps encapsulate that insulation in the thermal envelope and also keeps that bat from falling down in these concealed locations over time. As you can see, you got your fire blocking up there too. Fire stopping at all your penetrations. So down here on first floor framing, we're dealing with headers, we're dealing with stud columns, we're dealing with jack and king studs. In this situation right here, we have squash blocks coming from concentrated loads above. We have the strapping right here for braced wall construction. We're carrying that panel down to our first floor. Over here, we're also dealing with fire stopping at both our bottom and our top plates. We're dealing with engineered headers. And we're dealing with the strapping of these stud columns. Anytime you have more than 3 studs, it's very difficult to verify the proper nailing. So we require strapping at third points on these stud columns to make that a solid member. Now that we're in the garage, now would be an opportune moment to point out, as we were discussing earlier, load transfer. We got all those loads upstairs, girder trusses, jack studs. We're bringing all that load through the squash blocking in the first floor ceiling. We're bringing all that load down this stud column, down to the foundation. While we're down here, it would be a great time to point out code requirements for anchor bolt placement. Anchor bolts are required within 12 inches of the corner and every 6 foot thereafter, no more than 6 foot thereafter. Treated plate for decay resistance. Any fasteners into that plate must be corrosive resistant, such as hot dip galvanized. While we're in the garage, this would also be a great time to mention garage portal wall framing. We have this large opening in the side of this house. So for structural integrity, code requires that we have to deal with this. Means of dealing with that would include these large plate washers down here. This strapping going across the header, blocking at all my panel edges, and a header running from corner to corner. Let's talk about decks and porches. They are also addressed in the residential code. A lot of issues that we deal with in regards to decks and porches are the posts, the girders. Anytime your floor system is greater than 48 inches above grade, you got to have that post connected to the beam, and you got to have lateral bracing installed. Sealed engineered plans are critical because a lot of times they'll mention the need for hardware to attach that post to that footing. Also looking to make sure that those posts are in the center third of that footing. Due to accessibility and poor lighting conditions, we're not going to be able to go into the crawl space, but just want to let you know some of the stuff that we do look at when we go in there. We're looking at girder clearance from grade, making sure we have at least 12 inches, making sure our joists, if they're not treated, make sure they're 18 inches. Verifying all that blocking in there that we talked about before, all about that load transfer coming down. We're looking at our joists to make sure that nobody has notched or bored anything in there and hindered the integrity of those engineered members. Also, while we're down there, we're looking at our through bolting for our decks and porches, making sure all of that. While it's not required by code, it certainly would be a good idea to get with your jurisdiction and maybe perhaps do an inspection on the floor framing prior to covering it up. For all parties involved, if you do have an issue, now would be the time to try to resolve that instead of going up vertical with the house. While we're on the outside of the building, now would be a great time to point out the need for structural lintel verification. Code does require that any lintel that's bolted to the house must be verified prior to covering it up. So make sure that you get with your local jurisdiction and find out at what point they do want to verify that. Now in closing, Brandon, I would like to thank you for coming out and being part of this video with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. It's pretty obvious that you've gone through this house and you've done a great job punching it out. You've certainly made my job a lot easier. I don't see why we can't go to insulation on this thing now.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Jason, for your time.
Take care of yourself.